What is ISPM?
It's a great question. I was about to write and publish something on ISPM at Gartner, and then I got hired and I left. But ISPM, Jim, is an Apple Watch for your identity program. And the way I use this analogy is to explain that is the first or perhaps the best way of surfacing metrics to show you how good of a job you're doing protecting your environment. So that's the reason of ISPM to exist, right? So are you improving your security status? Or are you decreasing? Are you improving that? Are you getting worse at that? So the same way the watch helps you to remember, hey, you should take 10,000 steps a day. You should take this amount of sleep every night so you're healthier, you're stronger. That's the same process with ISPM. So the idea is ISPM is everything you can do before an attack, right? So are you taking the necessary steps to sustain an attack?
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Not so bad. Yourself?
Man, I am happy you're back, man. I am so happy you're back. And today is when this episode drops, December 9th, Monday, first day of the Gartner IAM Summit. So for those who are in Grapevine, Texas, and are, listening to the episode, you and I will be on stage on Wednesday at 3:30 with Becky Archambault. Really excited for that. She's going to be turning the tables on us and interviewing us. So that's going to be quite different. And for those who aren't able to attend the conference but are still listening to this episode, we're going to record a couple episodes while we're here, hopefully, and we'll have that for you guys to listen to.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun week. I feel like it's been a while since you are recorded, like in our normal sort of studio environment. I've been traveling and had, my real job has gotten in the way of the podcast, so to speak. So I'm glad to be back in a normal studio, neither not recording like on site somewhere, because you and I have been traveling all over the place for conferences like Authenticate, et cetera. So I'm back, baby.
Well, a lot of people think this is our full-time jobs. I mean, people ask me that all the time.
It feels like it.
It does. It feels like a second job, right? You hear about people working 70 hours a week, and it's like, oh, that must be horrible. But then I think about the hours that we put into the podcast, and we're probably, I don't think we're at 70. At least I'm not. But and the other thing is, like, it's funny. Sometimes my family members will be like, oh, you're such a hard worker. And I think, like I'm very dedicated to my job. I do a good job at it, but it's not like I work in a coal mine.
You're a hard worker, not a good worker, Jim, but a hard worker.
Oh, I wasn't going to say that, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no. Look, we do this because it's a lot of fun, and we'll keep doing it until it's not fun, and then we'll figure something else to do. So there you go.
So we don't have any discount codes to share with people today because this is this is the last conference of 2024. As Q1 is not a big conference time, but next year we're going to be going to EIC, Deniverse. We'll be coming out with discount codes for those early in 2025.
Yeah, stay tuned. I'll put them on our homepage at idacpodcast.com. Just scroll down a little bit and you'll see whatever the current discounts are. And yeah, feel free to use those. There is one for Gartner. If you are in the lobby of the hotel in Grapevine, you can't get in. IDAC 375. So there you go. Last minute discount code. But yeah, why don't we get into today's episode? Because I feel like we have so much to cover. And this is a guest that it took us a while to get on. We had him on earlier this year, and now we're back. We're going to talk about ISPM. We're going to talk about AI. Of course, IAM, and maybe get into some 2025 predictions on identity. So I want to welcome back Henrique Teixeira. He is the Senior Vice President of Saviynt and just a guy. Welcome back, Henrique.
I'm just a guy. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jim. It's always a pleasure to be back here at the show, guys. Well, it feels like a lifetime since last time we spoke, but thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, anytime, the door is always open, and I appreciate the mood lighting you've got going on. It's a very dramatic effect. You know, we're on video, so if you're not watching a video, you can head over to YouTube and kind of check that out. But you were with us back in episode 281. That was back in May. So here we are, about 6, maybe 7 months later, and just curious, what have you been up to since then? And then I'm curious also, you shifted over from a role at Gartner, obviously as an analyst, and now you're with Saviynt. Has anything surprised you with that role change?
Oh, yes. And lots of travel, right? Since I moved here, my son jokes, hey, Dad, why are you traveling so much? And we've launched this series of events throughout the globe, all these amazing destinations. And so, wow, I got to support this company I work for now, right? And I'm very grateful that we have this opportunity. And of course, I used simpler words. He's 11, Lucas, my son, right? And so, yeah, Dad, I think you should go back to Gartner. and no, but it's been amazing. Just the opportunity to be closer to the problem. That's exactly what I was chasing, right, when I moved. And I know we are now close to Gartner, the IAM Summit, getting ready for that as well. It feels bittersweet. Of course, I'll be meeting all my good friends at Gartner. It feels like the whole show, right, which I used to be the chair of. It's now an adult that has left the house, went away to college, and took its own speed, its own pace. And so I'm super curious to see what Gartner will be delivering. Excited. I'm very happy to be there in this new capacity, of course. It's funny that I don't know if you noticed the theme they chose for the show, right? So for the Gartner IAM Summit 2024 is Identity Amplified. And I can claim I was the person in the room when we're choosing the themes for that. Okay, let's choose Identity Amplified, because I can see I have amplifiers here, right? And guitars. So this is part of my life. And perhaps a little bit of trivia. When I suggested that, and there was a bunch of other suggestions, amazing options. Every year we go through an ideation process at Gartner to choose the theme of the conference for the year. And then I left, right? And I don't know what happened. But in my own branding, on my own LinkedIn profile, I used Henrique Teixeira, Identity Amplified, and I kept using that. And then I got a phone call from Gartner, and they say, Henrique, guess what? We chose Identity Amplified as the theme for this conference in 2024. I said, good, I feel flattered, right? That was my idea. But would you mind switching your profile to something else? And say, okay, of course. So I didn't make any fuss, and I changed. Now that's
where a good trademark comes in.
All right, yeah, but it's okay. It was not a big deal. So now it's Henrique Teixeira, identity driven, because I have an overdrive here and everything else. So identity driven, I think it's what I am as well, and what we've been doing at Saviynt, right? So driving the importance of identity and fixing this problem. So. But to your question, yeah, lots of surprises aside from the travel, which I already expected. Within Saviynt, I was surprised for the size of some departments inside of Saviynt and how organized it is. And I had no idea, right? And I used to joke that Saviynt was this best kept secret in the industry. So why don't you guys speak more about this or that, this particular innovation that you're launching? And because it was very much driven by technical people and engineers, but now we have a CMO, we have an amazing team, also marketing and messaging what it does. So I was kind of surprised about the thing, in a good way, about those things. Wow, even myself as an analyst, and I was paid to analyze you guys and understand what these vendors were doing. I thought there was a lot that was kind of mysterious, and I just learned after I joined the job.
So now this is like your first Gartner as a civilian.
Yes.
And it's freeing, right? You kind of mentioned of you're not really in charge of it. So now you can kind of go as a normal attendee, right? Just a guy.
Yes.
What is something that you look forward to other than, obviously relationships and meeting people and, and stuff like that? But is there like something specific that jumps out at you, this week as we're all here? It's like, oh, I'm looking forward to this. I mean, obviously, of course, then, giving us fist bumps and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I had a little bit of a taste of that when I was at SRM, Security and Risk Summit at National Harbor. So I was able to reconnect and feel that vibe again. But little things that I used to care about when I was preparing those conferences, like, for example, the tidbit you just shared that now Rebecca will be interviewing you guys. So I'm curious to see, okay, this is an interesting and fresh approach to this. Or who are the other guest speakers that they have picked, right? Because that was part of a chair and choosing who are the guest speakers, who are the keynote speakers. So I'm more curious about this, the background choices they made, and I know it's a lot of work, and I'm curious to see how it pans out. But I'm very excited for them as well. So I'm on the sidelines cheering for them. I'm sure it's going to be great. But also meeting my friends and our clients as well, and being there within the booth, Saviynt. We won't have Vans this year as we had for other events. We had like a Vans store and Vans shoes, but we have a nice surprise in store as well with that.
I've got my Vans in my closet, so that's a memorable swag for sure. And we've told Becky for our session, like, hey, you guys were really gracious when we interviewed you guys on stage. It was like, hey, can we ask anything? And we've told Becky same thing, like turnabout is fair play. So Becky, come at us, bro. we're happy to engage, whatever that may be. You've got other conferences you've been to. I know you were at HipConf, which I've never been to. Maybe you can give me kind of an update of what was HipConf life, and is that something like I should be looking at for next year?
Yes, that was my first time as well. An amazing roster of speakers, and I think that's what drove me there, right? So Alex Weinert and Pamela Dingle and a bunch of other amazing people, right? And it reminds me of, and I've never been to Identiverse on its early days, but it reminds me of that. The early days of Identiverse, a very practitioner-oriented type of conference. Pretty cool. I like the venue as well. It was New Orleans, by the actual space where they had the whole Mardi Gras, like carnival type of thing. So it was pretty cool. And but like I said, very practitioner oriented, right? Versus only CISOs and leaders. You had like all kinds of people from different levels, but also different type of content as well, which was pretty interesting, pretty cool. I love to go back.
Yeah, I get excited for the same thing, to like find out who the different guest speakers are going to be, because I'm responsible for booking our guests, booking our talent that comes in. I use those lists oftentimes for finding future guests who have an interesting and unique perspective. So, it's part of the whole identity at the center brand is bringing in great speakers like yourself. I know I don't have to sell folks that are listening on the show because they're already listening, but I've gotten so much feedback, so many times where we're doing the episodes where people say, identity is at the center. And I feel like we just accidentally struck gold. Or I shouldn't say accidentally, because we talked about identity as the center as a concept, but we never thought once about changing the name of the podcast. I think we kind of nailed it with this concept. And
that and trademarks are expensive, Jim. So
yeah, well, that's right. IDAC is something we trademarked, and that's a perfect segue, because I was going to say, we want to talk to you about the latest and greatest acronym, ISPM, Identity Security Posture Management. It's something that you've been talking about, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of talk about, first off, what is ISPM?
No, awesome. And it's a great question. I was about to write and publish something on ISPM at Gartner, and then I got hired and I left. But ISPM, Jim, is an Apple Watch for your identity program. And the way I use this analogy is to explain that is the first or perhaps the best way of surfacing metrics to show you how good of a job you're doing protecting your environment. So that's the reason of ISPM to exist, right? So are you improving your security status? Or are you decreasing? Are you improving that? Are you getting worse at that? So the same way the watch helps you to remember, hey, you should take 10,000 steps a day. You should take this amount of sleep every night so you healthier, you stronger. That's the same process with ISPM. So the idea is ISPM is everything you can do before an attack, right? So are you taking the necessary steps to sustain an attack? Are you strong enough, right?
So the management part is kind of like understanding where you are now and then improving it through evolution of like fixing things. But I'm also wondering, is this now a product space? So are there going to be ISPM vendors that maybe dashboard all this stuff out? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and exactly. So the first step of it is about visibility, right? Just surfacing that type of metric that say, hey, you're not doing a good job here in identity hygiene, right? So you're not even enabling phishing resistant MFA to everybody in your organization. Like half of your employees don't even have MFA. So this type of visibility is super important. But yes, the remediation of that is part of ISPM. So that's the M. Right, the management part. So you remediate, you fix this type of stuff. You're getting stronger as you go and you improve your security posture, right? I think it's a great question to ask, is this a valid market? Is it, I don't care. And I don't think buyers care about if it's a market or not. The thing is it real? Is it not? I think it's a type of discussion that, yes, at Gartner, I remember having those type of discussions, especially because when you have things like a market guide or a Magic Quadrant, by definition, it has to exist as a market, and Gartner has very strict rules what a market is. Now, in reality, if I want to buy a smartwatch or an electric car, is it still a car? Is it something else? When like a faster horse becomes a car, I think buyers, they will buy what they need to solve a problem they have right now, and so that's why I said not in any trying to be facetious or anything, but it's I think it's just it might be a market. I know of companies that they live and die, and that's the only product they have. It's their MVP is an ISPM product, and that's what they're doing. So the way I wrote research, it's more on the I make the analogy almost like a sitcom, right? I evaluate the situation. I take a picture of what's happening right now, and I write about what's happening right now. And what's happening right now, yes, there are companies that are building tools that they do exactly that, is to surface those type of metrics. Saviynt is doing that. We have announced our entry into ISPM, and I think it is different, right? So no, it is something different than IGA. It is something different than PAM. It is something else. So we could argue what the name should be, but I think if you ask me, it is a category of different things for sure. Is
it different than ITDR?
It is.
Okay. How's it different than ITDR? I feel like the definition of ITDR is providing to secure your identity systems. But then when companies go to market with a solution A from company A and solution B from company B could be quite different, and they still fit into this ITDR bucket. And, whereas like IGA is pretty much means closely the same thing to everybody.
Uh-huh.
Now, I would love it. Feel free to disagree with me on any of that, but I'm wondering, okay, what how does ISPM become or what is the bucket of ISPM? And is it, is there a clear definition over it? Or is this something that you're still spitballing, or the industry hasn't come to consensus on it, which is fine?
No, for me, Jim, it's very clear in my mind, right? So, and the way I wrote this research on ITDR is that this happens during an attack and after an attack, right? So it's a runtime threat detections. So you already have somebody shaking the gates, like forcing the door open, right? That they're trying to get in. That's when ITDR gets in. So it's threat detection. It's identity threat detection at the moment of the attack and responding to that attack. ISPM, it's all about the prevention, right? So if you go to NIST and other type of frameworks, so those are the things that happens before the boom, right? Before the attack, everything that you can do to prepare for an attack. So take Mike Tyson, for example, and Jake Paul, right? So all the preparation they did for the fight. So are you sleeping well? What's your nutrition regime? Are you training hard? Are you taking all the precautions so you don't die on that ring? Right? So that's ISPM. And yes, you're correct in the sense that IGA fits in that prevention space as well. As a matter of fact, everything that we did so far in identity is preventive. Right? That's why the ITDR gap was so big, because MFA is preventing bad guys from getting in. PAM is vaulting credentials and not allowing it to be misused. So it's all about preventing an attack. So ITDR happens when somebody is already trying to break in. So it kicks in the detection mode and responding to that. And that's what ITDR is about. ISPM is the prequel to that, right? So everything that you do before the fight to get ready for the fight.
This is not to disagree. This is probably more to agree, but just the thought is that, and I've seen Gartner has like the Venn diagram on this. And I think the third, so it's ISPM, ITDR, and I think the third is IGA. I'm going by memory. This is something I saw a long time back. But some of the stuff you're talking about prevention is in some of the ITDR platforms. Like, for example, Sempris, they do some analysis of here's the configurations within your Active Directory that are potential cracks in the foundation. So I feel like still companies are kind of bundling all these things into their solution. They're not being purists, which I'm not advocating that they be purists, but I think it does make it hard to wrap your brain around, okay, ITDR, it doesn't necessarily mean one thing, even though you're giving a very clear definition. I just kind of feel like we're still in this churning period, which leads to a lot of clients in my experience saying, okay, well, is this really the right time to jump in?
Yeah. And I think it's a great analysis, what you just made, right? Because when we are writing research and the market takes that idea and runs with it, it may be, hey, this is not the whole thing. And yes, a lot of vendors that were doing ISPM, because I didn't have the chance to publish things about ISPM before. So no, this is ITDR. What we're doing is ITDR. And I can remember 3 or 4 vendors that did that and say, guys, this is not ITDR. Stop. But then the word was out. The cat was out of the bag, right? So no, but we like ITDR. We're going to be using this label. So, but it's wrong.
That's right.
Wait,
that's right.
I'm going to be right about ISPM next, which is the prevention. And what you're doing is about prevention. It's finding the cracks and fixing the cracks. You're not being attacked. So you're not detecting threats, right? So to your point, it is kind of very enlightening to see that the power of writing research and what the vendors do with that, but also the buyers, right? And yes, the buyers get confused because, oh, okay, this is like ITDR. I thought this is more preventive. But when we talk about those things at Saviynt, I say, guys, no, this is ITDR, this is ISPM. So that's part of the job of being a strategist, is to be clear about those things. But I don't fault those other vendors. They say, okay, no, this is a cool concept and we can run with this and this is good for positioning and messaging. More power to you. But it can get confusing. That's, I think, is a characteristic of our game, if you will, or our trade.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly, I feel like we're getting into almost a little bit of semantics, right? We're really good at creating acronyms. And it's funny, Henrique, I was going to interject when Jim asked you what's the difference between basically ITDR and ISPM. And I was thinking about it very similarly. Like ISPM is all the stuff that happens before you get attacked. It's your plan, right? It's your hygiene of your identity program, your systems, your capabilities, your data, right? All that stuff. And I don't think there's ever a bad time to do that. You don't need a tool necessarily to do
exactly.
ISPM.
That's a day-to-day training.
It's an idea. It's, hey, should we have MFA? Yeah. Well, guess what? You just improved your posture management for an attack because now you've got a second level of authentication, right? And I think there are things like that where we can look at it and say, hey, here is what does my ISPM look like? And yes, maybe there are productized versions of that have a very structured approach to it, and it's a checklist, and maybe it bleeds over into a technology where it's like, okay, here's your checklist, and oh, by the way, if you click this button, it will do this thing for you, and keep it in sync maybe with whatever you define as your ISPM, because not every organization is going to have the same level of risk tolerance or capabilities or things like that. So I feel like ISPM is more of like a framework, an idea set to say, hey, here's how we're going to manage our threat level and our posture to protect against identity. Secondary to that is exactly what you said is, okay, something bad has happened. It got through our posture management approaches. Now what do we do? And that's the detection and response. And of course, there's plenty of technology now in that area, to help with that. But that's kind of how I was thinking about it in my head.
And that's exactly. And you said perhaps even better than I could. It's about training and things and things that you got to do regardless, right? You got to eat and got to sleep, you got to train, and the more you do of that and eat healthy, you're gonna be better prepared for a game day. Game day is you are attacked right now, right? So all the drills, all the training that you do, that's a posture management. So you're becoming stronger in that sense of protecting your identity infrastructure and your identity systems. Yeah.
So I did find that Venn diagram, and it was a Gartner diagram published in 2024, and the two overlapping circles, there were not three. So I don't know if it's technically a Venn diagram, but it's overlapping circles.
We got to get Eve on. She's our expert on Venn diagrams. So Eve, if you're listening, we need you to make a judgment call.
Yeah, exactly. We have to have Eve's input on that. We could put a link in the show notes, but it was prevention and ITDR and the overlap. And you can see pretty much to my point, there are companies that are trying to play in both spaces now. Whether or not they call it one product or not, I don't know.
There is an overlap. That's a good point. When I was writing about this with Mary Ruddy, which is now Chief of Research at Gartner, right? And between the prevention things and then posture management and detection response, you could detect a change in posture. Right. So I don't know if you guys saw on the iPhone now, they have this vitals thing now, metrics that say, hey, your vitals changed. So there was not an attack. You're not having like a heart attack, but your vitals changed, like you had a change in posture. So a little bit of detection changes of posture. But I think for the benefit of the industry, right? So this semantics discussion, I think it's important, but we shouldn't be just focusing on that. But I think, and Rebecca talks about that too, focus on the outcomes, right? I think it's super important. So the outcome of ISPM is to be stronger for the attack.
That's right.
And the outcome of ITDR is to detect things faster and respond faster to those things. I think that's simple as that.
I think this is a great segue because I feel like this is where AI is really starting to shine. What we called maybe machine learning before and AI and all that's coming together now. We've got things like copilots and agents and bots and, all kinds of stuff going on. Where do you stand on this from like an AI perspective? And especially I think this terminology of copilot, agent, bot, is there really a difference, or is it really, again, we're back into semantics of it's still this, non-human identity performing an action on something?
Yeah, and I'll get to that when we talk about difference between AI agents and AI copilots. But when we think about AI, right, and before AI, it was cloud, and one of the things I've been talking a lot in those different roadshows that we're delivering is that if we look at the trends that driving change in 2024, 2025, cloud has been around for more than 20 years. Cloud was invented around the year 2000, right? So almost like 24, and which is crazy to think about how long it took here so we get to the cloud security of Wiz and Palo Alto, the CSPMs of the world. The reason I bring this up is that now we have this other inflection point or a second wave happening, which is AI, which happened 2 years ago, right? And generative AI becoming mainstream, and even like people like my mom, she's in healthcare, and she's, what, have you used this ChatGPT thing? Yeah, it's amazing, right? So it's in the hands of the people. So this new inflection point, I think, gives you the perspective of what is driving innovation in companies today. The same way that cloud drove innovation for the last 20 years, it's undeniable. Cloud drove that type of innovation. So you pay money to AWS, you pay money to Azure, and you run your workloads in the cloud. It's better in so many ways, right? More elastic, resilient, etc. AI is driving this other wave. And when we think of I think was during the Salesforce event, and Mark Benioff was bashing Microsoft because copilots are dead. The cool thing now is AI agents. That's why AI has to exist. And now, man, it's a semantic type of discussion that I think it's not very productive. But those are different things, and there's not better or worse thing. But a copilot is an assistant, right? That's by definition. A copilot is an assistant that helps you generate code. It helps you to generate photos or code or generate text. So this an assistant. It could be also a chat bot in a sense, right? Translating natural language in a SQL type of statement, like Claude and other models that can do that very well. An agent is going to be performing actions. So it could be a workflow or executing a remediation or a lawyer type of agent or a marketing type of agent. So this becomes more of an agent in the way that execute tasks versus an agent that creates content. So I think it's just a category of two types of things that is not one better than the other. There are applicability that you gotta have. An assistant will be the best application. An agent will be a better application for other things. So that's my interpretation of that. What's interesting, however, in that push to innovation, right? So there's a lot of opportunity for us to still profit from that cloud innovation curve. So how many startups can launch their own products in the cloud? And that's still happening, right? AI is going to be the same thing. However, my prediction is that curve is not going to take 20 years to maturity. Cloud today is mature, right? Especially infrastructure as a service, even SaaS, it's mature. AI, we're going to see that curve going much faster. There's an author called, what's his name? Ray Kurzweil. I think that's his name. Ray Kurzweil. And he's a futurist. Ray Kurzweil, he predicted that AI or technology singularity would happen in 2045. But now this person he revised his prediction. No, it's not 2045 anymore. It's going to be 2029. So I was bang on, and I made my prediction before I saw his, and I was just looking for evidence. Okay, who else agrees with this crazy stuff I'm talking about here? But I think the wave for maturity in AI is going to happen in the next 5 years.
So, Henrique, I think the whole idea with agents or bots or copilots, I think it's going to sharpen my point on this holy war. And the holy war, Jeff and I use this term, right? And the prime example of the holy war is, where should contractors be managed? In the HR system or something else? And, it's like each time you go into a client and you talk to them about how they're going to manage things going forward or where they are today, it becomes a holy war. HR doesn't want to manage these people or yada, yada. I don't want to talk about that. What I want to talk about is a different holy war, which is what should be the front end to your access request process. So many companies say, we want it to be our ITSM, our ticketing system. We want to take ServiceNow, where you go and request everything else in the organization. That's where you go to get a parking pass or a new iPhone or et cetera, et cetera. Why can't you go there and ask for access to a folder? Personally, I think it's a terrible idea. And I'll tell you, I think that the AI future is going to put an exclamation point on why I think this, which what I've always felt was the change management for this is a nightmare. But I think the bigger issue is going to be, you're not going to get to take advantage of all these things that are going to be built into the front end within IGA system. So now I go into an IGA system and it tells me, well, you should request this access or you shouldn't request that access, et cetera. Or even better, we get into a generative interface where I say, I need to give Henrique, I just hired Henrique, I need to give him access to the accounting system, similar to what Mark has. And then it starts asking me questions and we go back and forth to have a conversation until we get to the point where it's a well-formed request that I submit. If you're using some intermediary front end, I just don't see how you ever get to the point of being able to do that.
Yeah, but isn't this just the march of progress and technology? There really wasn't an option to request access in this scenario until, let's say, 10 years ago. It was, you had to call the help desk, right? Or walk down to a desk or something like that, right? Somebody could do it. And then it became, why don't we try to Amazon this and make it more of an e-commerce style? Let's create a shopping cart. And then you have things like ServiceNow, right? Where you have, or other ticketing systems, right? Where you have like all your services listed and you can make a request. Now we're in the age of AI and we're seeing identity governance vendors pull in some of that, right? Most IGA players have had a request interface of some sort, right? Whether it's Saviynt or SailPoint or Amada or Fisher or whatever it may be, right? They all have that. Now we're looking to this AI future is, what if your IGA didn't have a web interface and it was a chat interface of some sort, natural language processing, right? Things like that. The whole goal of those interfaces are to do what? To request the access, to make sure that it's appropriate, and to log the proper approvals and receipt trail, right? So you can audit it, those sorts of things.
Yeah, if I had to make a wedging bet here, I think Jim, and I'm sorry, I agree with Jeff here. I think I agree that the future of IGA and all the things around the life cycle, it should live in a more natural language, chat oriented. So I'm a big proponent of ChatOps. If you guys are familiar with what ChatOps is, but for the sake of the audience here. So ChatOps is the ability of using Slack or Jira or ServiceNow, so whatever. So we already have those apps in your phone that you can check messages and respond to those messages. So interacting with your IGA tool through Slack. And it's funny that we are also announcing that within Saviynt. So there's a company called Pronoasis, and they developed a chatbot for Slack that front faces Saviynt. And I think that's brilliant. I don't want to build an iOS app. I don't want to build an Android app, because you already have an app. You already have Teams. You have Teams, you have Slack. So I think that's the future of the human interfaces for today. It may change into the future to be even more natural language. But I think I only see the benefits of doing that way, right? So people, they are already used to use ServiceNow, or is it Teams or Slack? So why not embrace it? And of course, we still have all the controls for segregation of duties, separation of duties, for fine-grained entitlement and all the things that we need to do from a security standpoint. And yes, IJ can continue to do that. But from a front end, I think the future is on ChatOps.
And it doesn't replace things that exist today either, right?
No,
I think
you could
we're in
have
this
like
transition
multi-channel.
state, right?
That's exactly
another arrow in the quiver. It's like, okay, yes, you can interface with my web interface, or you can my chatbot, or send me an iMessage or RCS message or whatever it is you're using, right? Those sorts of things. That's kind of how I always think about it too.
Yeah, exactly.
So my point is, okay, where I'm confused is what you're saying, that if I'm a client now, a customer of yours now, and I'm implementing my IGA system for the first time, or maybe I had one that was like 20 years old, something like that, and now I'm going to buy your software and I'm going to implement it. Would you tell me, and I tell you, I want to use ServiceNow because ServiceNow is where people go to request everything, parking passes, etc. I don't want to give them a new place to go. Are you going to discourage that? Because
no, I'll say, let's go. Let's do it. Let's use ServiceNow. And we have a native integration with Saviynt, right? I think modern IGA providers, even before I joined Saviynt, I was recommending vendors, hey, this is the future. We should not fight this holy war anymore, right? So you have this front end. You have trained thousands of employees to use ServiceNow. So why are you trying to train them in something else? So they are training using that interface. Don't fight against that tide, right? And we connect in the back end. So we have service catalog integrations, right? So the same way you can request your laptop to be fixed, you could request this new package. Now, there's the whole AI thing, and I agree with you, Jim, in that one, that we can use RBAC up to a point, right? So you package everything, you make that package requestable within ServiceNow. You get to the point where things get so granular. And I think we're not there yet, but we get to the point where you're going to open a SaaS application on your phone or in a browser and say, it looks like you're trying to access this app and you don't have access. Would you like to open request right now? Right? And then things happen even before you know it's already a flow going on, right? I think that's where we're going to go.
So you're saying it's kind of a multi-channel way to go ahead and...
Very much.
Omni-channel identity and access management request.
That's the future, guys. Absolutely. And I can't force everybody going through my own interface all the time. That's not kids these days, right? So they're multi-channel. They're using Roblox to chat. Come on. So we got to keep up with the times.
Yeah, Jimmy, bring up an interesting point, because I think this is a struggle that a lot of organizations face is, we are deploying an IGA. And I think by default, I think a lot of folks are like, let's make it part of our ITSM system, which, Henrique, to your point, right? We've trained our users already how to do that. But I think it's an interesting approach to say, hey, why don't we do a little bit of both? Yes, let's do the ITSM integration, but why don't we also consider some sort of chatbot type approach, right? Or a conversational approach of how do I do this? Maybe it's a little thing that it's in the corner and it's like, hey, it's not replacing anything, but hey, do you want to try the future, right? Or do you want to test it, right? Or, do things like that. I think there's an opportunity here where, products in this space could layer on some sort of conversational, approach to requesting access, because the biggest concern that a lot of people have when it comes to this is, I don't know what I'm requesting access for. I don't know any. All I know is I need to get to this file. And if there is something behind the scenes that translate that to say, hey, Jim, I need access to the logo file for the Identity Center podcast, the robot figures that out for me, handles all the approvals, and maybe you get a text message, Jim, and it's like, hey, Jeff wants to access this file. Is that okay? And you just say, yeah, through a text message, right? Or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
And then it's like, okay, you've got all the things that you would normally do through a e-commerce type approach, traditional, I will say. is still logged and happening, but anything that removes that friction, I think, is really interesting. And I would be curious to see, what are some of the solutions out there that can layer on that chatbot type approach? Because I don't think ServiceNow, as it exists now, is going to be the way ServiceNow does it in the next 5-10 years.
Exactly.
They're already
so
testing stuff.
Yeah. To your point, I think multi-channel is the answer, right? It really depends on culture, what your users are more familiar with. If they use a lot of Slack, right, and having that integrated with Slack, we had IBM. IBM is using Saviynt internally for their own employees. They built their own chatbot, this AI chatbot based on Watson, Watson X, that interacts with Saviynt, right? So they also built this thing because, no, we are IBM, we're using Watson. And say, good. So I think having this openness, right, to communicate through multiple channels, I think it's the direction of the future. I'm not going to be strong-arming users, say, you got to use through my own interface. I think that's the wrong way to do it.
Henrique is not going to show up at your desk and put you in a headlock and say, submit this form.
I go.
Maybe he will. Maybe he will. I don't know that you know Henrique well enough to say that he won't do that.
Here's my gift to you, Henrique. You need to trademark Henrique I and then make a chatbot.
Oh, Henrique I love it.
Thank you, Jeff.
So,
I'll think about it.
Henrique, let's shift topics a little bit because I think it's fair to say, at least I'm going to say, you don't have to agree, is that you're an influencer within this space. A lot of people follow you and look to your vision, your strategy for the identity space. And I've got to think that you're pulling inspiration from others, right? I mean, that's how it works.
Oh, yeah.
I want to know who are some of the other influencers that you're following and what they're talking about that excites you and kind of like informs you to build your perspective on the world.
No, it's a great question, Jim. And it's funny that sometimes I find people that say, why haven't I met this person yet? Right. So one of them is, and because of my job today at Saviynt, I'm in charge of strategy. So I'm thinking about strategy a lot. I'm studying more about the discipline of strategy. So there's this guy named Eric Leach. He used to work at Strata Identity, and he writes a lot about strategy. And I think I think he has his own blog on Medium and stuff like that. But there's one thing that it really stuck with me, and perhaps with the audience will be interesting as well to understand that. So one of the things that I do is to think about the vision of Saviynt, long term, and etc. And he said something. Even before we stop to write and think and communicate vision, we got to think about purpose. That really stuck to me. So what are we trying to do with this? What is the problem we're trying to solve? We're trying to prevent things or we're trying to detect things. Okay. Now with that purpose in your mind, you can draw a vision where you want to be. Right. So, okay, we're protecting this or we're doing this, we're detecting that, and then vision comes. So, Eric Leach is one that I strongly recommend people to follow. The other one that comes across is, one of the founders of Netflix, Mark Randolph, and he's very active on LinkedIn as well. And I wish I could meet him one day. But he seems a very interesting guy. And he said this thing that stuck with me as well, especially because of strategy, right? So a good strategy is not about having that great idea, that one idea. It's about having a system that allows you to test as many ideas as you can, right? So being inclusive, not to be constrained by my own thoughts, because I joke to say, I'm just a guy. I'm one guy, right? I'm too limited in my own capacity. So I really like that concept, okay, creating that system of just testing very quickly as many ideas as possible and coming up with, okay, now you have like 10 amazing ideas. I think that's really eye-opening.
So we're coming up here at the end of 2024. It's always good to look back and say, what got accomplished? What do you think it will be remembered for? Things like that. How do you think identity is going to be remembered for in 2024? Were there any specific trends or topics or things that jump to mind?
I think 2024 was the year of ITDR, if you will. I think it became very mainstream. We spoke about at HIP conference, the Hybrid Identity Protection Conference. Man, it was a whole conference, like 2.5 days, just about ITDR, basically. I said, wow, this is crazy. So I think if I had to choose one theme that was very, very popular this year and identity to be remembered, the identity breaches, right, that happened, all that stuff that we did to protect our systems against those type of breaches. I think that's what the year is going to be remembered for.
Jim, what about yourself? What does 2024 bring for you?
I feel like the recognition or the creation of identity security as a concept, which has a lot to do with concepts like ITDR. I think if we look back on this era, though, it's like a formulation era. There's a lot of things being put out there. ITDR, ISPM, wallets.
Machine identities, right?
Machine identity, blockchain identity. Yeah. Non-human identity is like, well, I feel like non-human identity has always been there. It's just like the recognition all of a sudden that, oh my gosh, there's a problem.
Oh, I got to protect that too.
That's in our scope. So there's all these things. Like, what's going to actually, stick around and be a part of the future, and what's going to kind of fall off the plate? To me, that's the era. I don't know that it's 2024 specific, but it feels like we're at that point where it's like we're up to here with ideas. And some of them, nothing ever comes to a clean death in the identity space. Think about UEBA, right? It was like all we could talk about 3 or 4 years ago. Nobody talks about it now, but has anybody declared it dead? Or is it now just like
evolved to something else?
It evolved into, ITDR almost.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. It kind of evolved, and like nobody declared it dead.
Yeah, it becomes a capability of something else, right? And I think that's what may happen with ITDR as well. ITDR becoming a capability of bigger markets like XDR or SIM or whatever you name it, right? So you're building this tool and it has ITDR capabilities in it, right? And that's something that I had predicted before as well.
I think the health of the industry is that you're seeing the leaders continue to invest in their platforms, bring in new things, and hopefully get stronger. But also the startup community is as vibrant and as strong as ever. You go to conferences in the identity space, but I think in cybersecurity overall, and there's like just so many startups out there.
Yeah.
And it's not like they're, just trying to add a feature onto something else. Like some of them are incredible, and they're taking on big problems and taking them on in new ways. And that, I think, is an indication of like how healthy the industry is.
I think for me, you guys have both really good answers. I think it's still AI. Like it seems like every topic this year that we talked about had some infusion of some level of AI. And how are we going to plan for this? How are we going to integrate it? How are we going to leverage it, right? How are we going to protect it? How are we going to protect against it? I feel like AI is sort of like this thing that's sort of like the shark beneath the waters, or maybe it's the iceberg, right? You've got this little
No, it's the wave, man. AI is the wave.
Slowly rising.
The cloud is is the AI wave. So absolutely, everything that we spoke about, I think they're surfing the wave of AI. So I agree 100%. So the same way we surfed the cloud wave, and we had the startups way back like Automize and CloudKnox and Hermetic for that cloud wave. We're gonna have that's gonna happen again, man, for AI. And I think that's the push of innovation. Identity itself, it's protecting that, and that's the constant, right? The constant of all the waves since the mainframe through the decentralized compute to cloud to AI. Identity is a constant, right? Like Jem said, like even machine identities, it's been there forever. It is just now we have this different type of pushes or waves. Like I said, this shark now in the water. I still think 2024 being that year of threat became like mainstream, but at the same, and I spoke exactly about that, Jeff. Two things that happened in 2022, 2023 really exploded 2024 was AI and identity threats. Those two things, I think, happened at the same time.
So what about 2025? Any predictions for next year? Are we still going to be talking about AI the same level we are now? What do you think, Henrique?
Yeah, I think we're going to still surfing that wave, right? At least for the next, until 2025, until 2029, when we hit singularity and AI becomes more powerful than us and than humans. I think the big prediction for next year is going to be identity or machine identity security, which is something that we briefly spoke about here in this episode today, is that it's being there forever. But now people, okay, I think we've done a decent job with workforce. We've done a decent job with CIAM and externals. Oh, what are those machines doing? And it will become like undeniable. We can't ignore this problem anymore. So I think for next year, I do predict that organizations that invest more time and money into finding basic things like visibility and hygiene of machines, they will improve their resilience in cyber like considerably. I'm estimating from 30 to 50% efficacy of protection or being stronger and more resilient.
I like that prediction because I feel that's spot on. And again, it tails back into this AI. There's going to be this explosion of non-humans doing things in our environments. We have to manage those things. So I feel like this whole, whatever you want to call it, machine identity, non-human identity, I think we need to settle on what that definition might be as an industry. Yeah. But that whole idea of like, okay, there's going to be little bots running around, and they might be so ephemeral, they only exist for a millisecond because their whole task is to do one thing and it's gone. And being able to track all that is going to be really interesting, and I think really compute intensive to try and track all that type of stuff. 100%. Jim, what about you? What do you want to predict for 2025?
I got something, but I first wanted to say, so we did a podcast with David Motti recently, and we talked about non-human identities. And one thing he argued for is that we shouldn't define something as what it's not. So saying that as a non-human is defining something by what it's not. And anyway, so that's a little side note.
Yeah, but let's talk about that real quick. 2 minutes, if I may. Sure. That's a good point. And see, that's why I like David. He's a smart guy. Defining things by what they're not is like a Turing machine. It's called a Turing machine. It's like a Turing non-human, right? But non-human is not wrong in the sense that we have humans and we have non-humans. In that category of non-humans, there are cats, there are dogs, right? There are animals, there are bacteria, there's ghosts, and there is machines, right? So I see machine as a subset of non-human machines. Machine, you could break that down into workloads and devices. So I think non-human is not completely wrong. It's just it's a much bigger scope of things that we're not talking about. I'm not talking about cats and dogs. I'm talking about machines. So it's a non-human, but it's a machine. And then within machine, it's either workload or a device.
It helps group this concept, which I don't think is well managed as people. I mean, when you look at enterprise people, there's kind of a way to manage them. They start an HR system, they go into your IGA system, they get provisioned access, etc. Machines, like, what's the authoritative source for machine accounts? There's really not. And the kind of identity or machine or account that Jeff mentioned that is created for in an ephemeral nature is a lot different than the Active Directory service account that is used by the SQL server that was set up 12 years ago.
Yeah.
So
the way we're defining it at Saviynt, and this is important, right? So the hierarchy or the taxonomy of that. So we categorize it as a machine identity, a machine account, and a machine credential. 3 different levels, and we can talk about that perhaps some other day. But there's some lack of clarity of what are we talking about here. And to your point, yes, there's no authoritative source for identities that are machine based most of the time.
All right, here's my bonus 2025.
I got to answer this 2025 because I did. I'm sorry I took us off track there. But so you know me, Jeff, doom and gloom. So here's
Mr.
my doom and gloom
Positivity.
prediction for 2025. So
Everything's going to be great. Everything's going to work.
New Year's Eve, you should be celebrating the year behind, not the year forward. So here's my concern is as humans, we react to things that happen. You know, people fly planes into a building, we start screening people better. We don't think, oh, somebody could fly a plane into a building, so we better start screening people better to prevent that. So it's very unfortunate, but that is human nature. And I kind of feel like identity security is in the same place, where people actually have to be breached, or breaches have to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal more and more, so that you can't escape the issue for people to en masse invest in identity security. But that's what's going to happen at some point. Whether it's 2025 or later, I don't know. But I think there is going to be, a sharp increase in breaches that drive the identity security investment.
It makes sense, right? So what you're saying is that it's going to get worse before it gets a little bit better, right?
It's going to get worse before people go and get behind this thing.
It makes a lot of sense. Knowing the human nature of people thinking, yeah.
I don't think it necessarily impedes, though, the pace of innovation, right? What we're talking about is investment. And yes, we are humans and budgets are limited and people go where the fire is and they put out the fire. There will still be people who are thinking about where will the fire go next. And products will be developed in anticipation of where those go. And sometimes they're right and they make $1 billion. And sometimes they're wrong and they fail, or it wasn't the right, solution, whatever it may be. And so, I'm with you, Jim. I'm trying to take a more positive spin on it to try and end our show. But I'm with you because it does take a bad thing to happen sometimes we can't have that again. We can't have another, SOX, finding, or we can't have another regulatory finding or a breach or whatever it may be. We have to invest and catch up. And I think that's where a lot of companies fall into this trap of what I call the peaks and valleys of their investments is they didn't keep sustained investment to keep pace and keep good security posture management in place. They did a spend, caught up, and then let it die slowly. And then now they're doing another spend and they're going back up again instead of having this consistent approach to it.
Yeah.
I agree.
Which I had a comment on that, the last thought of how we keep things interesting, right? So posture management becomes day of your life. And one thing that I caught up during my recent travels, which they have been quite intense, is Duolingo, right? I'm learning French and I can order tea in French now. It works. It works. And that type of gamification. So I'm thinking perhaps we could do something like that for identity posture that becomes something more acceptable, right? Yeah. Nobody likes to wake up in the morning and work out, but that's basically what we're describing that identity security posture management requires.
If you can figure out how to turn World of Warcraft into some sort of, gamification of identity management, I am right there with you, baby.
There you go, man. Startup time. Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and start to wrap things up. I got to ask, because you mentioned it earlier, Henrique, Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul. They fought a couple weeks ago at this point. What are your thoughts on that?
Man, it is crazy because my son was asking me about this. Because when I say, hey, I'm going to do this podcast today, and say, okay, are you going to be talking about Mike Tyson? Say, what? No. So now I think I have to.
Well, now you can say you did.
Yeah, we did talk about Mike Tyson. Man, what I think was amazing is that how many generations were watching that thing, from Gen Alphas all the way to Boomers, and different preferences. Of course, I wanted Mike Tyson to win. I think people my generation would perhaps, there's no way this YouTuber will I thought Jake Paul would lose that one on points. But I think there's a lot of the controversy came in about the things he said after the fight, right? And that he took it easy on Mike, and which is kind of weird. But before all the hype came in, I thought, wow, man, this guy's going to be destroyed. I think Mike Tyson's going to kill this guy. and there was a fight before the main match. I don't know if you guys saw it. Did you guys watch it? Was a Brazilian comedian. Was a Brazilian comedian called Whindersson Nunes. So Whindersson is a stand-up comedy comic in Brazil. turned into fighter, and now and he got demolished, right, by this Indian boxer. And that's what I would expect to happen with Jake Paul. But I was wrong. I think as many people.
Well, I think a lot of people.
That was a weird fight.
I mean, it was an exhibition, right? I mean, let's look. Father Time is undefeated, right? Tyson is 58 years old. You know, I sneeze and sometimes my back hurts. He got into a ring and went 12 rounds with a young man who is an established fighter. I don't know how good he is, but he's been in the ring and he's been fighting. You know, he's got some success there. But 58 years old, hey man, hats off to you. I would have loved to see Tyson, win, only because I think it's like a generational thing, right? You grew up with Mike Tyson. You grew up with Michael Jordan. You grew up with Walter Payton, right? All these sports heroes of your time. Yeah. You don't want to see them get dethroned. And hey, Tyson made what, $20 million? I don't need to go 12 rounds. Someone can push me and I'll take the $20 million and I'll fall down and take the TKO.
Right, exactly. But I'll tell you what, also hats off to that guy, Jake Paul, just to orchestrate this whole endeavor, right? And he has this vision of, okay, I'm gonna learn a new sport and I'm gonna fight perhaps the GOAT. And to make that happen, it takes a lot of persistence or vision.
Yeah, Jake Paul got $40 million for the fight. And Henrique, and Jeff, I don't know if you guys watched the fight or not, but Jake Paul definitely could have pummeled Mike Tyson. First off, he was like 6 inches taller and bigger.
Exactly. His reach was
my longer, right? Fellow 50-year-old and plus, you're not going to beat somebody in their 20s who's more fit than you. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
If it was a 1-round fight, Tyson might have been okay, but your VO2 max, which is like your ability to move oxygen around your body at 58 years old versus a young man in his 20s in his prime. It's just.
So I say Father Time is
the idea of him lasting, I think it was an 8-round fight. The idea of Tyson, and he was exhausted by the end, but Tyson said one thing at the end, which is he doesn't know if that's his last fight. Why would it be? Who amongst us wouldn't go in the ring for $20 million and just let Jake Paul kick the crap out of us? As long as you live, you got $20 million.
So Jim, maybe this is our future endeavor. We did, Fido Feud at Authenticate. Maybe we do a identity boxing circuit or some sort.
If there's anybody who's listening who wants to beat me up for $20 million, I'll take your money.
Right.
I will not get into a cage match with David Marty, however. So this is where I draw a line.
Even for $20 million.
That guy is massive. So
yeah, he is. He's really built.
But back to Tyson and Jake, just to close that up. What my son told me this morning, he said, "But Dad, that fight was scripted, right?" I said, "What do you know about scripts?" And
I don't know about
very
scripted
interesting
either.
Comment. Yeah,
I mean, everyone has a plan to get punched in the face. I think
it's
Mike Tyson
opinion.
said that once.
It's his opinion.
Said Mike Tyson.
Yeah. It was an exhibition match. It was interesting to watch. It was a spectacle. If you could watch it, I know Netflix had trouble streaming it. I didn't watch it. I didn't really care so much. But hey, just to be in the ring for 58 years old and to go the distance and be up there. Like I said, sometimes I sleep wrong and my neck hurts.
Same.
I'm not going to criticize any of those guys. Hats off to them. They made their money. Time to move on. All right. Why don't we go ahead and wrap it up there for this week? Henrique, it's always a pleasure having you on. Open door policy. Anytime you got something you want to come on and talk about, the door is open. Come on in and we can get to it. We're going to go ahead and leave it there for this week. Henrique, I'll put a link in our show notes to your LinkedIn profile. So if people want to reach out, connect. Awesome. They'll be able to do that. Also have a link to Saviynt so people can check that out. If you haven't heard of Saviynt, not sure who you might be if you're listening to this podcast, but go check them out as well. And we'll have links for Jim and I as well to connect. Helps us, if we get feedback, say what works, what's not working. So we're always looking for stuff. If you have ideas for shows, drop us a note there. That's always good. And then of course, we're still on the YouTube. IDACpodcast.tv takes you straight to our episodes there. Do us a favor, like and subscribe. That helps out the show. And we'll leave it there. So thanks everyone for watching and or listening. And we'll talk with you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.